Disney are at it again and have decided to make another live-action remake of one of their animated classics. And in this video, we are going to compare each of these interpretations of Cruella DeVill, as well as find out which overall is the superior movie. Let the battle commence. The story for the two 101 Dalmatians films is that a married couple named Roger and Anita have just had some puppies, and Cruella DeVill, Anita's employer, shows up demanding that they sell her the puppies for a price. Roger and Anita decline and Cruella leaves in a fit of rage. Soon after, Cruella hires a couple of thieves to break into the couple's house and steal the puppies so she can skin them and use their fur to make a coat. The two succeed in kidnapping the puppies, but their parents, Pongo and Purdy, set out on a mission to rescue their puppies from Cruella DeVill and return them home. And the story for Cruella is that due to her own actions, little Cruella got her mother killed. She grows up an orphan with two boys called Horace and Jasper, and she grows up wanting to be a fashion designer. Through a set of circumstances, she gets hired by the Baroness, who is very impressed with her clothing designs. She soon discovers, however, that the Baroness was the one who orchestrated the death of her mother when she was a child, and that it was never her fault. So she vows revenge on the Baroness and tries to run her fashion business into the ground and be the last fashion designer standing. Now, much like what the modern day live-action Disney remakes do, the live-action 101 Dalmatians is longer than the animated movie, but unlike the modern day Disney remakes, it doesn't put the extra time to bad use. If anything, it gives you more seamless transitions from one scene to the next, so much so that it actually almost makes the story feel a bit more rushed in the animated movie, as opposed to the modern day live-action remakes where they are longer yet somehow feel far more rushed than their shorter animated counterparts. And in some regards, I would argue that it does some scenes better than the animated film. For example, even as a kid, I never liked the scene where the dogs are sending messages across the city that the puppies are missing. The scene went on for way too long to me, and it very quickly just became noise. And this goes on for 7 to 8 minutes. But the live action remake did a better job with this scene, as for one, there is music which gives it a much more energetic pace, and it doesn't feel slow like it did in the original. Now that's just one example, and most of the time, the animated movie scenes are of course superior, but surprisingly, the live action remake does a very good job of recreating some scenes. And I had a lot of fun watching these very talented actors reenacting these iconic scenes. Now the opening of the remake is a normal 90s movie opening with chirpy music, but in the animated movie, Pongo narrates a lot of the early scenes of the film, and it's a very nice and therapeutic narration which really eases you into the story. And in both versions, the characters and the dogs jump very quickly into marriage, and to be honest, that really does just need to happen so they can get the story going once they and the dogs become family. Hence the puppies come into the picture, and so does Cruella. Aside from that one scene I mentioned earlier, the original animated movie has very good pacing, and the animation and drawings are just so nice to look at. And there were some really funny scenes in the movie as well. Rewatching the movie as an adult, this is the first time that I was paying attention to the TV show that Horace and Jasper were watching as opposed to the puppies escaping. Watch it for yourself, you will be surprised at what kind of adult humor they are trying to get away with in a kids movie. The remake also had some adult humor, but we'll get to that later. Although I will say that the animated movie does a much better job of showing the strain the escape is putting on the Dalmatians. The journey back is much more difficult for them, and the animation and the voice acting really emphasizes how exhausted they are. Whereas I don't really remember the struggle that they had in the 96 movie. They just headed back and eventually got home. So the 1996 movie definitely does lack that, and it also deprives the movie of tension. But probably the biggest thing the 1996 film has going for it is that it is written and produced by John Hughes, and anytime he had his name on something, even if the project was not very good, it always had this inviting and family-friendly atmosphere to it. And whatever you think about this movie, you can't deny that it is very nice to have on, even if in the background. And I can't say the same for the modern live-action Disney remakes. Now, it's time to talk about the story for Cruella. What can I say about the story for Cruella, except that just 20 minutes in, and I thought there was too many songs used in the movie. And it was 40 minutes in when the film finally started to get interesting, and it involves the necklace that Cruella sees on her employer. And I like the idea that Cruella wants to turn this woman's life upside down, but this film really needed to trim the fat. The whole plan they concoct to get the necklace back was so nonsensical and overly complicated. All they had to do is take the necklace off of her neck. There are any number of ways they could have done that. They didn't need to work out the entire security security of the building and work times of her employees in order to break into a safe and get the necklace. That whole part of the movie felt completely pointless and unjustified, but the movie just wanted a heist, so they forced one in. I thought that there was a lot of conveniences too. So much stuff was happening under people's noses and they didn't see the stuff that Cruella was doing. The visual style of this movie doesn't match the tone of this movie either. It has a look of a grounded, gritty film, but the soul of a cartoon, and it keeps changing its tone over and over again. The best part of the movie is Cruella trying to take down her mother's killer, and it was at this point when the story really started to get going and the plot became a lot of fun. But at the same time, you couldn't help but wonder, what did I just watch? Because I enjoyed it, but it definitely had nothing to do with the character of Cruella DeVill. So the story for Cruella was good, but it just didn't feel like it was a story for the character of Cruella. And for a movie that took a lot of inspirations from Joker, for the life of me, I don't know how they managed to make it longer than Joker. Because like I said, the movie doesn't actually start to get going until the 40-minute mark, so the movie story has a gigantic pacing flaw, and that's in addition to the tone being all over the place and the needlessly complicated plot lines that didn't need to happen. In comparison, I just like how nice and simple both the original and remake movies are, and how consistent they are with their tones. It's almost childlike in its execution and the way it tells its story. A man and a woman meet, they like each other, and then they decide to get married. That alone really does demonstrate a childlike innocence and sensibility to the logic in how some of this story is told, and I can't help but love it. It even portrays the villains as something from the viewpoint of a child. There is something quite real about how they carry out their crimes, but also quite juvenile and immature at the same time. And that combination makes their actions really humorous. And you have these two actors that can pull that kind of nuance off in a very convincing way. The tone of the movies is also dark and funny when it needs to be, and the visuals, the music, and even the acting all falls very beautifully into the family kind of film this is. And there is just something very inviting and innocent about both films when you watch them. And for me to say that about a live-action Disney remake really means a lot coming from me. So the movies with the superior pacing, tone, and story is the animated 101 Dalmatians, the live-action remake, and finally, Cruella. Now we all know what kind of a character Cruella is. Cruella DeVill is someone who is disgustingly narcissistic and prioritizes so much about her sense of fashion over everything else. And the area of fashion that she loves is killing animals and using their fur for her coats. And as we see in both the animated and live action remake, she will stop at nothing to get them. Cruella DeVill is also supposed to be somewhat of a scary character, and although both the animated and remake are definitely scary versions of the character, Emma Stone's version is not. In fact, scary is never a word that even crossed my mind with her. Even the way they introduce her in the opening of the movie was a full-on cartoon. For one, Cruella is actually born with the black and white hair. I always thought that she had dyed her hair as she grew older and slowly changed her look, showcasing what kind of person she is through her fashion sense. But no, being born with it is just as deep, I guess. And that straight out felt like a cartoon. And by going this route, the movie started out feeling more like a cartoon than the cartoon did. And her rebellious childhood phase was just so phony. And I actually enjoyed watching Cruella getting bullied because I thought this young version of the character was executed so badly that watching her get bullied was kind of like watching Disney's new remake getting bullied. And the origin of how her mother died was so obvious when they were trying to make it seem like, oh, it was Cruella's fault this whole time. I had it pegged right at the start, purely by the way the scene was shot and with the whistle sound that you could hear. And then they make it this big reveal later and I just found it laughable. Really, I can't stress enough how bad Cruella's childhood origin was. And when we do finally see her as Cruella DeVill, it didn't have any impact. Now in the live action movie, they really build up her appearance, and they conceal her face whilst you see her really long fur coat alongside all of these other fur designs in her building. All the while, the music keeps building up, and the last few seconds of her introduction when Anita realizes she's behind her turned into somewhat of a horror scene. There is something so artificial and so over the top and fake with that smile that I find it a little unnerving, and Glenn Close really does nail all of the colourful characteristics of this character. Cruella DeVill is supposed to be the kind of character that you look at and think, man, what a bitch. I mean, Roger sees her for the first time and is trying to be nice, and she acts like he's not even in the room.
It's Roger, and it's a pleasure, Miss DeVille.
What's a pleasure?
Making your acquaintance.
I wish I could reciprocate. Tell me, darling, you married him for his dog.
And it's funny how annoyed he gets at her, and he starts to deliberately say things that will get under her skin. And we get this funny conversation with an adult joke thrown in there too.
She's going to have a baby.
Oh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry.
We're having puppies, too.
Puppies? You have been a busy boy.
And I really like how Glenn Close's performance really stands out compared to everyone else. She is so freaking weird and loud. Then when you see completely normal people like Anita, who is very soft-spoken, the contrast in personalities and the way they talk and react is just so fascinating to watch.
If we make this coat, it would be as if I were wearing your dog. Woof, woof.
After this one look at her, you know she's crazy. And the intimidating music that accompanies Cruella whenever she's on screen really adds to her presence in the film. She even drops ash in their house like the animated one did, and it's all of these blatant signs of disrespect that really form her unlikable character. And you don't get any of these qualities in the 2021 version. When you get down to it, she's just too good of a person, which really goes against her character. There's a point in the film where they make you think that she skinned and killed 3 Dalmatians and made a fur coat out of them, but then it turns out that that never happened. It's like they are deliberately trying to show how much she's not Cruella DeVill. I actually thought that the Baroness was much more of a Cruella DeVill character than Cruella was, and the twist that did surprise me was that she was her mother the whole time. And I actually thought that was pretty clever, and there were enough clues there that set it up. And there were elements of Cruella where I thought to myself, huh, this is a cool new interpretation of the character, such as when she commanded the Dalmatians to sit and they went by her side. That's actually an interesting angle that she can command some dogs, and I really liked it, as comic bookish as it was. Although it was very weird to see her treat Horace and Jasper like crap. I mean, these two are practically the only family she has in this iteration of the story, and it is so jarring and out of nowhere when she suddenly just starts to treat them so badly. I mean, there's being determined, which is all that Cruella is in this film, but then acting like you've turned full-on evil and treating your own family like scum makes no sense. And I don't mind her treating them this way, but this is supposed to be a big part of her character's change into becoming evil, and it just happens out of nowhere, when in actuality, we should have seen her slowly transition into this new behavior. And it honestly feels like the filmmakers treated this part of her character's transformation as a checklist rather than a plot point. And it doesn't make her come off as evil, it just makes her come off as trying to act edgy like a spoiled teenager. And that is not what you would expect from one of Disney's most iconic villains. In the end, Estella had put on the voice of Cruella, but I just didn't see Cruella. I feel like somewhere in this world there exists the real Cruella DeVill, and she would show up in front of Estella, blow smoke at her, and then smack her across the face.
Now listen, you idiots!
And Emma Stone's Cruella is nothing like the original Cruella DeVill from the animated movie. Not even close. The final thing I will say about Glenn Close's Cruella is that normally in these live-action remakes, when the actors have to repeat dialogue from the animated films, they usually sound like much cheaper line readings, but Glenn Close really does reenact the exact same lines, and they don't feel any lesser when she says them. And I would share that compliment with the rest of the actors in this film too. But in the end, the Cruella that is the best is the animated version, because she feels the most like a real person, and whereas Glenn Close does a fantastic job, she is hamming it up and making it exaggerated. And it fits in the context of the film and makes for a very entertaining performance. It just doesn't feel as fully defined a character as the animated one did. But still, Glenn Close did a fantastic job, and she definitely made this an iconic performance, one that everyone still remembers. So the movie with the superior interpretations of Cruella DeVill is the animated movie, the live-action remake, and finally, Cruella. Now Roger is a musician in the animated movie, and in the 96 movie he is a game developer, and I didn't mind that change. And I remember seeing these games in the movie as a kid, and I always wanted to play them. And I really like the actors that played Roger and Anita. They both felt like a very classy husband and wife, much like they did in the animated film. And now that I'm older, I like them even more. Not just because their husband and wife relationship is now even more classy, but because I recognize them now, or at least one of them. Roger is played by Jeff Daniels. In other words, Harry from Dumb and Dumber. And I couldn't stop laughing at the image of Harry from Dumb and Dumber hoping and praying for approval of his video game from a child game tester.
Well, what do you think?
Even girls won't like this game. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, but wait. Herbert, wait.
And he has some really funny lines too. When Pongo falls for Purdy and puts Roger through the ringer to find her, Roger later has a word with him and says,
Fools aren't born, Pongo. Pretty girls make them in their spare time.
I'm sorry ladies, but that is just hilarious. And I liked the running joke of him constantly trying to design a good villain for his video game, and you can imagine which one he goes for by the end of the movie. And I gotta say, when Roger stands up to Cruella and says that she can't take a single one of the puppies, I actually liked it better in the 96 movie, because he stands his ground 100%, whereas in the 61 movie he shows a little bit of nervousness before he fully stands his ground. And although that works too, I prefer the approach that the 96 movie took in this moment. And also, he deliberately tries to get on Cruella's nerves and send her as much jabs as he can after her inexcusable and demeaning behavior. Something I always wished the animated Roger did ever since I was a kid, and the more he talks about how happy their lives are, the more infuriated and bitter Cruella gets. And even Anita has more of a backbone in the remake, as at first she very quietly apologizes for Cruella's behavior, but then there comes a point where even she has had enough and she actually stands up to Cruella and firmly tells her no. Whereas the Anita in the animated movie was always very tolerant and forgiving of Cruella and her insults towards her and her husband. Maybe it was of the time, maybe it was because she was afraid of losing her job, but Anita in the live action movie had that fear too, and yet she still stood her ground and actually gets fired for turning Cruella down. And well, forgive the crude analogy here, but it shows that she has balls. And then we have Anita and Roger in Cruella, and they were absolutely terrible. First off, they are only set up in this movie, and the movie tries to make them feel like a classy couple like the animated and remake versions, but it doesn't come off as genuine. It just comes off as incredibly staged and fake. It only feels like Anita and Roger were in the movie just to say they were in it. You could have replaced them with any no-name characters and it would make no difference to the story. And yes, they did race bend them, and you can really tell as they are clearly trying to act like composed white people like the original characters, and it feels off. So yeah, it's a shame because I really liked these two characters in the previous two iterations, and I really did not get a feel for them in this version. The nanny was also cool in both movies, but when the dogs are barking and communicating, why did she have to join them in her sleep? This made no sense, and even as a kid, I thought this was stupid.
You know, at times she seems almost canine.
Oh, that's what they were trying to say. Well, that makes sense of absolutely nothing. I thought this was stupid before, and I think it's even dumber now. Then we have Horace and Jasper, the two memorable, stupid, yet incredibly cruel burglars, and they are a ton of fun to watch in the animated film. They really are. They pose a real threat to the puppies, and their slapstick is something that everyone can enjoy. And in the remake, Horace and Jasper are played by Hugh Laurie, better known as George from Blackadder, and Mr. Weasley from Harry Potter.
Oh! Look at the size of that scar!
Imagine if that's how he reacted to seeing Harry for the first time. And it's funny to watch George being served by Darling from Blackadder. That's two characters from Blackadder in this one scene only 7 years after the show was over. It's almost like a mini reunion. And what can I say about them except they are such perfect casting. And I would go as far as to say that they are as perfectly cast as Glenn Close was as Cruella. First of all, their heights and body sizes are perfect. Their comedy is great. They also have the grit of a real couple of burglars, and honestly, they were my favorite parts of the movie. And then we have the two characters in Cruella, and I thought these guys were good too. They weren't great, just good. They have slight resemblances to their characters, but at the same time, they are portrayed as thieves with a heart of gold, and that really did rub me the wrong way. And their comedy doesn't always work either, and it feels like they are trying too hard. The best parts of their characters is when they were playing it straight and acted like their feelings were hurt when Cruella started treating them like trash, and that's when I felt for them the most. But again, much like Cruella, these don't feel like the characters of Horace and Jasper. And they make up with Cruella in a generic scene where they don't want to help her and Cruella apologizes, and yeah, this scene couldn't be more by the numbers if it tried. And after they predictably forgive her,
So what's the plan?
man, I really hate that freaking line. That's 2 movies in a row that I'm comparing now that have that line, and I really don't like it. It's so cliched. So I think that the animated movie and the remake did a great job with introducing and remaking these characters. But Cruella reimagined them, and they really feel like they have lost their identity and have been completely Disneyfied. So those are the human characters in these movies, and I gotta say, I was very surprised to find out how much I like the characters in the remake. Roger and Anita are 2 characters I can happily spend so much time with. Morris and Jasper were great fun to be around too, and I feel like that is a combination of fantastic casting and John Hughes as producer who, like I said, has an amazing talent for making these movies feel very warm and inviting to watch. And although the characters are just as good in the animated film, I personally am going to have to give the very slight edge to the live action remake. I know, I'm surprised too. Going into this comparison, there was no doubt in my mind that the animated characters would win, but no. But if it's any consolation, the Dalmatians are much better characters in the animated film for obvious reasons. So the movies with the superior characters is surprisingly the live action remake, the 1961 animated film, and finally, Cruella. Being animated, of course, the dogs are able to be much more expressive in the original film, and the same goes for Cruella DeVill, and somehow Glenn Close is still able to translate so much of that to her performance, something that many other actors would not be able to do. And Emma Stone, she doesn't even come close, and the reason for that is because she's not even given the chance to. The movie very intentionally tries not to make her come off that way, and Emma Stone unfortunately is not able to be evil. She's able to be rude, but that's about where her madness stops, and when you take into account that Cruella DeVill is supposed to be this evil and crazy villain, that pretty much sums up how much of a failure this movie is as a Cruella origin film. They just went the safe route again and decided to turn one of their iconic villains into a misunderstood hero. Scratch that, it tries to turn the 3 iconic villains into misunderstood heroes, and they are just way too soft to ever become the evil characters that we know them to be. And they can try to copy Joker all they want with the film's identical aspect ratio, the time period, the darker color correction, the cinematography, the smile song, but one thing that Disney clearly don't have the balls to do is to follow through with their villain's transformation. Joker had the balls to follow through with it, and it earned the title of Joker. Cruella didn't have the balls to go through with it, and as a direct result, the film has not earned the title of Cruella. This film is just Estella, because ultimately, we never really get to see Cruella in this movie. It's time for the scores. The animated 101 Dalmatians gets an 8 out of 10, the live action remake gets a 7, and Estella gets a 5. Overall, the animated film is a great original movie, and the live-action remake is a very good live-action telling of the story. And then we get Cruella, which just stands out as a sore thumb. There is entertainment to be had in it, but none of it has anything to do with the source material that it is trying to represent. Also, nothing about the movie felt like a PG-13 to me. The movie could have easily been rated PG, but for some reason it got a PG-13. The rating system nowadays, I tell ya. And the whole feminist messaging of all men are evil, it's here, but it didn't get me mad. I was aware of it when it was happening, and I did roll my eyes at how easy things were made for Cruella at times, to the point that it was just borderline convenient writing, but it just wasn't as bad as other movies. Well, it started out that way.
I am woman. Hear me roar.
But as the movie went on, Cruella didn't just have everything handed to her on a silver platter. She actually had to work for her goals, and she made mistakes along the way, and she had to figure a way out of them. And I never felt that the movie was trying to boost women up by constantly making men seem stupid, which was a good thing. So there you go. If you want to watch an animated and live action telling of 101 Dalmatians, then I can highly recommend these movies. If you want to watch a movie where a fashion designer gets back at another fashion designer with a cinematography and visual style of a Batman movie, this movie is for you.